Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello, welcome back to UNO and to Consider This. It's been 14 years since a man blasted into the scene of Omaha's homeless concerns. He is with me today. He has been called to something new, but he's not quite sure yet. Pastor Bob Timberlake.
It's my pleasure.
I guess, people knew that you were going to leave. I mean, you told a select few, but I was shocked to hear this week that you were leaving the Open Door Mission Lydia House.
Carol, I've had a kind of a nudge in my heart for the past year.
Oh, you're from Maine, so you have a heart and not a heart. I don't.
Hey up. And about a year ago, I began to really have a restless feeling and kind of the still small voice of God saying that you might be finished in Omaha. It's time to move on.
We should backtrack just a little to explain. Most people, I don't think how you would not know or have heard about, or when issues of the homeless were discussed, or just your special efforts there about the Open Door Mission and then later the formation of Lydia House. But just for point of clarification, it's located sort of on your way from Omaha downtown to the airport off Abbott Drive,
right.
on the right as you head to the airport.
The way we put it, the mission is 1 mile southeast of Epley Airfield, right behind Budget Rent-A-Car. And the Lydia House, of course, is visible. That's right behind the Ramada. But I will tell you, though, we've been given notice that the airport's going to take the Lydia House in not less than 7 years, and maybe sooner.
Ooh,
so we're concerned about that.
Little concerned about that.
Yeah, because it's our visibility. We have that mural there.
That very nice mural.
I know.
I want to talk, though, about the issue of the homeless. You sort of began your personal mission. You believe you were on a mission from a higher power, but you got into the issue of the homeless in 1965, 35 years ago. And when I look back on how people looked at the homeless, and I was a teenager then, it's like the homeless, the almost untouchables. But that was my perception from where I stood at my point of life. What was the perception then generally, not just my 15-year-old perception, and how have things changed?
Carol, the picture has changed dramatically. My wife and I met in Detroit, Michigan. I was an intern at the Detroit City Rescue Mission right on Skid Row in 1965. I like to tell people that I met Suzanne on Skid Row, but
and I bet she loves
that
when you tell that.
But back in those days, and by the way, the Open Door Mission and the Detroit City Rescue Mission, we belong to a national fellowship. It's called the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. And they have a national research committee that verifies the things I'm going to tell you today. In 1965, in fact, in the 40s and the 50s, and even into the 60s, the homeless were all men, literally all men. We didn't see homeless women and children until the mid-70s. So let's go back to 1965. They were all men. The average age was 55, and 95% of them were addicted to alcohol or some other drug. Society thought of them as winos, derelicts, bums. But society missed a blessing, because when you get to know those men, and we still have that type of man today, but when you get to know them and find out what led them to the bottle or to the needle, often it's a tragedy beyond their control. And even today, surprisingly, we're going to talk about women and children being homeless, but when we put our ads in the World Herald,
and you always have that man, that stereotypical
Absolutely.
Male face, the man.
And some of the higher-ups in the city say, oh, we wish you wouldn't put those pictures in there. Well, first of all,
Glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you about
those
that.
men do sign a model release, by the way, and they're tested. That gentleman that we used this year is actually from Los Angeles. But the fact is, if we put a mother and 3 children in the ads, we get no money, not a penny. Because society still thinks of the homeless as being winos, derelicts, bums.
Now, just stop there for a minute and we'll go back to the historical perspective you're offering. I guess maybe it's just I would not give money for that type of person, but I guess I would see a woman and children, and I think I would be more, I would think some people would be more apt to give to that picture.
We work with an advertising agency. They raise all the money for World Vision, $600 million a year, and they raise about $400 million for rescue missions. We are a rescue mission. Trust me, they've tested those ads with women and children. I think it's because people don't want to believe that women and children are homeless. It's too personal. And also, and I don't mean to criticize your business, but when the media come around the mission at Thanksgiving and Christmas, almost always the camera pictures of a man. And the more derelict, the better. And I've often wondered, maybe it's because the media, when they're doing the news, they don't have time to explain that the homeless today are mostly women and children, but society thinks, and whatever it is, the money comes in when the most sad-looking derelict brings in the money.
Do you get criticized for that?
Well,
In the homeless, I won't say the word business, but in the homeless community, those who
Yeah.
provide shelter, and these shelters are always filled to the gills, and no matter how many we have in Omaha, it seems.
well, there's been the occasional criticism, but when we explain that this person did sign a release, and he actually isn't even from Omaha, Nebraska. In fact, years ago we used to use our own men, and we found that to be too personal because
Yeah, but they might be maybe
they
seen
didn't
somewhere
want
else.
to be, right, even though they signed a release, and sometimes we'd pay them $5, for their time. But then when they would go downtown, they'd be embarrassed.
Yeah.
So now we use this national man.
But do you get criticized for feeding into the stereotype rather than trying to change it? Even though fundraising is fundraising in a sense, you have to. That's what keeps the doors open.
Well, you take people where they are, and you lead them to where you want them to go. And I spend most of my time, including this is kind of an exit interview, I spend most of my time talking about women and children. I mean, 50% of the homeless in America are women and children.
Okay, hold that thought and let's go back again to where we were. The stereotype was true then in 1965, that they were middle-aged plus men that had an addiction problem of some sort.
Right.
Maybe were trying to battle it or just didn't have choices or didn't feel they had choices. Were these people lacking in choices at that point, or was it the addiction? And where does the spirituality come in? When, is this pretty much the homeless mode now, that there's some spiritual element?
Well, the spiritual element made a tremendous difference in their lives. I could keep your audience all day long just thrilling them with the lives of men, like a guy named Mel Trotter, who stumbled into the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, was wonderfully converted to Christ. He went on to become the founder of 60 missions. You can go to the Mel Trotter Mission in Grand Rapids and get in your car and find 60 missions today. He was a drunk. He actually took his little girl died when she was 2. He took her shoes in her wake and sold them for a bottle of wine. Another one, Billy Sunday, one of the greatest evangelists who ever lived,
Very
was an
well
alcoholic,
known, yeah.
right. He stumbled into the same mission, went on to become second only to Billy Graham.
But obviously you offer the spiritual component and a place to stay, but has it evolved, before we get to the women and children, has it evolved more to job training or looking for opportunity rather than just housing and praying?
Well,
Or what?
you know, a lot of the people wonder why we don't have vocational education. We find that, first of all, you've got to clean the man up on the inside. You've got to give him respect and dignity and a feeling of self-worth. We believe that there's a vacuum inside, that we believe that every one of us is born with a vacuum. Some of us try to fill it up with money, with romance outside of marriage, with drugs. You know, this vacuum is insatiable until we realize it's a God-shaped vacuum and it can only be filled by Jesus. So we see scores of men, women, and children just totally changing on the outside after we settle the issue on the inside. But quite frankly, the work ethic is worse today. When I use the word use, I put it in quotes. The homeless men often help cook the meals and serve
Sure.
the meals. And we're finding it harder and harder to get these men to work.
I think you might hear that in any
Yeah.
sector of, but maybe it's just, maybe my
Yeah.
mother and father said that about my generation.
Well, a
but-
lot of it is because of divorce, because a lot of young people today don't have a male role model in their life. And for a guy, that's important. I'm so much like my dad. Good and bad, although
Oh,
my
yeah.
dad was.
Yeah,
he
but I
was
mean,
good.
we do take a lot from the male and female role models
We
of
do.
our lives.
It's important.
And for a young man, I think, that's why we put so much stock in Big Brothers and some of these
That's
kinds of
right.
things.
Let me tell you that we have 3 master degree counselors. They all have undergraduate degrees in Bible, and then they've gone on and earned master degrees in counseling. So we have about 22 men that are committed to a 9-month program. And then we have 17 families that are committed to a 7-month program. We don't keep the families as long as we do the single men. But we're doing group therapy, we're doing AA, we're doing a program called Overcomers, a different 12-step program. But the counselors tell me that the first 3 or 4 sessions, they try to help the young men and the young women to find out, why did you turn to the needle? Why did you turn to the bottle? What was happening in your life that forced you in that direction? And usually it was things beyond their control.
Split family, violence
Yeah.
in the home, whatever.
Traumatic divorce, the death of a child, but more often than not, a troubled set of parents.
Are there still, I know veterans make up a large number
third.
of the males. Are you still seeing war traumas that may have?
We're seeing a lot of, 1/3 of the homeless, 30%, have a military background. And we do see a lot of men. My own brother is an alcoholic, and he's my best friend. He's a Vietnam vet who lives on a beach in Mexico, and he just lives with a hell inside of him. He was sent into Cambodia to rescue. A lot of our planes went down in Cambodia, even though we weren't supposed to be there. And my brother had to go in and recover the bodies, weeks and sometimes months.
That's burned in
And
your mind.
yeah, I just love him to death. But yeah, we see that among the war veterans.
You also, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the women and children are domestic violence, victims of domestic
Our
violence.
Lydia House has
yeah.
60 beds, and Sheila Flipsy, wonderful girl, she's a Princess Di look-alike. She told me that 98% of our women and children at Lydia House have been sexually violated, and many of them physically and emotionally. In other words, multiple levels of violence. In fact, you're kind of holding me back, but the number one reason today why women and children are homeless is domestic violence.
All right, so we have more people that are homeless than all the shelters in the area can provide space for.
In fact, we're turning away 30 families a month.
And what is the answer to this? And obviously you're not going to be successful with all of them. And I wouldn't expect anyone to be. I mean, when you talk about a void in the heart or the soul or whatever it is, that's not anything that you can put a date certain deadline on.
That's right.
You just can't.
The answers are manifold, and we're addressing most of them. First of all, we've discovered that if you don't get the homeless in a program, the revolving door rate or the recidivism rate is 90%. So therefore, and we kept seeing these families coming in, staying for 6 weeks, coming back in 6 months. So now we have this very intensive 7-month program for families. There's 10 hours a week of class. There's 39 Bible lessons they do. Each lesson takes 4 hours. There's
Oh, you're
5.
tough.
Well, it's not a Mickey Mouse program. It's free, but it's tough. And then there's 3 hours a week of counseling, most of that individual. There's at least 5 support groups a week outside the mission. They have to leave and go like to a midweek service at a church or an AA meeting or Overcomers. Even the children, when they come home from school, they're programmed in different classes because it's pretty traumatic to be a child and to be homeless.
Well, where does, obviously, for those that have a shot at getting back in the stream of life, you know, you said you don't do vocational, but there has to be some sort of, I mean, you know, they do need to go somewhere with a purpose. Maybe there's a spiritual purpose you talk about, but there's the life. There's that
That's right.
living thing.
Well, while we don't do vocational, they're all working. The guys are working 35, 40 hours a week. They're working in the kitchen. They're driving our vans. They're cleaning the building, which is janitorial skills. But the problem has never been the lack of a job, particularly in Omaha, Nebraska. There's all kinds of jobs. It's the ability to keep the job is what we work on.
That thing in life that just kind of keeps you going, whether it's a job or commitment to anything. It's more than just a job. It's wanting to go on, I guess, wanting to have.
Well, feeling good
to
about
move
yourself,
forward.
feeling good about yourself, and a sense of pride, and also a desire to help others. That's a big part of our program.
Kind of getting out of yourself.
The Bible says you're more happy when you give than when you receive, and that certainly has been the hallmark of my life. There's no happier man than Pastor Bob, because when I drive home at night and there's 200 people sheltered and fed, then we have a nucleus of 400 inner city moms who come to the mission every month for groceries, for furniture, bric-a-brac, clothing. So it is more blessed to give, more happy to give. There's a lot of factors going on there. But first of all, we got to take care of the inside, and then the outside falls in place.
There's a group of shelters, and they've in the Omaha Metro, and they've talked about issues and worked together on some things. And
Yeah, we do that.
there have been times though where I got the feeling from some of the other shelters, the people that headed them, at times, not anything consistent, that maybe. And I'm not saying you should have been, but that you weren't all on the same. They weren't on the same page with you, or you weren't on the same page with them, and that. And I don't mean to be critical. I'm just asking the question that you were working at cross purposes with them. Now that doesn't mean that your mission was always the same all the time.
I love tough questions, no problem. That coalition, which had a different form 14 years ago, the first meeting I went to was at the Stevens Center. And I walked in there, you know, just happy and excited, having finished a wonderful ministry in Buffalo, New York for 10 years. And I barely sat down, and one of them said, "Pastor, are you going to still keep beating those homeless people over the head with your Bible?" And a lot of them around the table were embarrassed, because that particular person should not have welcomed me to the coalition that way. There was quite a bit of jealousy early on. For one thing, I was getting a lot of television exposure, a lot of radio exposure. We were doing the ads in the newspaper. Quite
Well,
frankly,
you're pretty aggressive at fundraising and information.
I'm not shy. I mean, that's not my problem. I'm not shy. And I believe in my cause, you know, and in all 4 cities that I've been, it's gone the same way that it went in Omaha. And that's why I'm excited about the next city. I take struggling missions and I build them up, and then leave them in good hands. But you may not remember, though, about 4 years into that little bit of jealousy, I went to them one day and I said, "You know what? Let's have a sleep out on the green, on the mall, the Great Plains Winter Sleep Out."
I remember that.
And they said, "Pastor, you would share that idea with us?" I said, "Sure. I mean, we're going to help all the homeless." There were 1,200 people sleeping out, P.J. Morgan and his son, and it was a carnival atmosphere. The ads were so wonderful, like lie down and be counted, or, you know, instead of stand up and be counted. And we were the #1 news story on all 4 networks, and front page of the Herald, you know. Well, the next year we did about 900 people, but it was bitter cold that year. So the next year we made a mistake.
Carnival atmosphere was
The
quite.
next year we made a mistake. We went into a gymnasium and it flopped.
It just didn't
But
have the
I don't believe there's been that jealousy because we belong to the Coalition for the Homeless. We have a fax that we send around to all the missions every day, listing how many beds are open,
Right.
et cetera. And we serve on some committees for the coalition.
So it's just
Yeah.
kind of an evolutionary process.
In fact, one of the coalition has already called me and thanked me for my service. I've been getting letters, phone calls, it's been emails. I want to say this. This is the most compassionate and generous city that I've worked in. Now we're comparing this to Morristown, New Jersey, which is the 13th wealthiest county in the United States. We're comparing this to Evansville, Indiana, where you have the Bible Belt generosity, Buffalo, New York. It is amazing how much people give out here. I was in Funk, Nebraska in the fall at a Lutheran church. There were 12 couples in the church. I gave my heartwarming talk. At the door, they handed me $1,400. In fact, I do find that if you travel about 75 miles away from the city, the giving is even better.
And those are in some of the towns that are feeling
Yeah,
the pinch.
yeah, but farmers always cry poor, you know. They always do. I had a farmer on the tour to Israel. Pastor Bob, I can't even afford lunch. Well, I kept working on him during the whole 10-day tour, and when he flew back into Epley, he stopped by the mission with a check for $10,000.
Well, he's thrifty.
Yeah,
And that, okay.
and generous.
You have been, as you said, you're not shy, and you have kept the issue of the homeless in front of the Omaha community. You've been aggressive in fundraising, and yet, I think it was a very famous person said the homeless will always be with us,
Well, Jesus said the poor you'll always have with you.
or the
right?
poor.
Yeah, and you will.
And so where does this battle, battle's not a long word, this mission to help the homeless, where will it be in 35 years from now?
Well, it's up to, it's fundamentally up to the churches and to the families. You see, back in the book of Acts, the early church took care of the poor. And to quote one of my heroes, Ronald Reagan, he said that if every church in America would adopt between 3 and 10 welfare families, we could eliminate welfare overnight. And he's right, because if a church were the avenue by which the poor and the homeless and the needy were being helped, the church would not only take care of their physical needs, but also their emotional and spiritual needs. And certainly welfare has been a failure. And so right now we have 10 churches. When our families graduate from the 7-month program, we now have 10 churches that provide apartments and mentor them for 18 months.
So
That's the key.
that's the key.
Well, the
Community support.
the cure key is the church and
Right.
the community, but fundamentally it goes back to the family.
But
I've never
a
had
church is a family, so that's
Well, it is.
so
It's-
those who have not
it's
who
a
have had
wonderful
family
family, right.
crises.
You know, one time in my life I walked into a bar. I had
Only once?
One time I've been in a bar. It's interesting because this guy in Morristown, New Jersey had a real serious heart condition, and I heard he was in a bar. So I walked in to get him, and you know what? It was so friendly in there, so supportive in there.
It sure appears to be
And
sometimes.
you know what? It's the counterfeit of a church. I mean, that's the devil's answer to the church, because the church should be as friendly and as warm and as compassionate as Joe behind the bar that cares about his patrons. I really was
I
surprised.
never thought about that.
Yeah.
I never thought
well,
about
I
that.
say that Satan has a counterfeit for everything that the world does, you know. Satan has a counterfeit for everything that's in the Bible. So don't go to bars on the way home. Go home and be with your wife and kids so that your children don't
Can I
become
go
homeless.
to the bar once in a while and have a sandwich with my husband?
Well,
Maybe.
say a prayer on your way in.
Oh, okay.
Don't let this program end without me telling one heartwarming story.
All right.
And it's only going to take about,
All right.
now?
Go.
Okay. The Saturday before Thanksgiving, a little girl came to my office from the suburbs. Her name was Melissa, 9 years old. Pastor Bob, I see you on TV. She gave me her piggy bank, $32. I took her on a tour with her mom, gave her a hug, gave her a set of my Uncle Bob's story tapes, 2 hours later, her mother called. Pastor, when we left the mission, we went to Oakview Mall for lunch. And while we were having lunch, Melissa looked under her table, and there were 3 $10 bills on the floor. And she said, Mom, it's fun to give to God. He gives right back.
Out of the mouths of
And
babes.
he does, in ways that we can't measure.
Now, what happens to you? You said the restlessness and maybe burnt out.
Right. I'm pumped.
Yeah.
I'm pumped.
But you're
I'm not
waiting for
restless
the next
anymore.
call.
No. I
The
mean,
anticipatory.
I made the
phase is
decision,
there.
resigned on Monday. 6 a.m. on Tuesday, I was working on my resume. I got it today from Elaine's resume, 42nd and center. And you'll
Shameless
probably
plug.
cut that out, you know. But
Nah.
anyhow, it's being, when I get home today, I'm going to go on the internet. There's a number of Christian job placement bureaus. I'm excited.
So you don't know if you're going to go to another mission or a congregation? or-
Probably a mission. I've got the heart of an evangelist. I don't have the heart.
Oh, really?
Of a
Tell
pastor.
me something I don't know.
That's right. My job is to save the whole world, not just a congregation.
But you still do, you know,
Yeah.
in your biz,
Yeah.
you still do it one person at a time.
You do. God has given me the ability to build a team. One of my regrets is leaving the team that God has allowed me to build. We have a guy named Pastor Chuck. He has revolutionized our evening gospel services. He brings humor into the services. He even gets the homeless men up into the pulpit, and they'll read a poem or read scripture or tell a funny story. He's a character.
So you're
Yeah.
still a man on the move, but you are literally going to move now.
Yeah, we won't be in Nebraska, I don't think. First of all, I have a non-compete clause. I'm
I
not
gotcha.
allowed to raise money locally. And the mission did honor me with a very, these board members are awesome. I've never worked for as nice a board. Some of my other boards were
A
pretty
little
mean.
parting gift, as they say on the game show.
Well, it was a job well done gift.
Okay, well, that's
And
great.
I think you'll find me within a few months directing another mission, probably a smaller mission.
Well, you'll find me ending the show because they're waving me off. I sure want to thank you. Thank you for your service to the area. Pastor Bob Timberlake, good luck to you.
Send a check to the Open Door Mission.
Never quits. Thank you for joining us this week on Consider This.
Consider This with host Carol Schrader is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.
Beginning this February, your news and information program of choice, Consider This, can be seen twice as often. In the Omaha Metro, you can watch Consider This on KYNE TV Saturdays at noon and Sunday afternoons at 2. Statewide on any TV2, you can see Consider This Friday nights at 11:30 and Monday afternoons at 12:30. More Consider This more often, more chances to be informed. Call us for a schedule.